I will just start off by just doing a little introduction to myself, since I am your moderator for the day, and just tell you a little bit about what brought me to this. And that's really my father, who had Alzheimer's. And my background is in journalism. I was more than 10 years at Time Magazine. I was at Bloomberg News before that, covering everything from the Obama White House to the Arab Spring. But I was also my dad's primary caregiver for the last 5 years of his life, and he had Alzheimer's. My mom actually died from the stress of caregiving for my father. She cared for him for the first 10 years of the diagnosis. And there's actually a Stanford study from 2002 that shows that 40% of caregivers, dementia caregivers, die before the one that they're caring for, because the stress of caregiving is so great. And so it's not an uncommon story. And so caregiving for my dad was really defined, I think, a huge part of my life, and led me to start MemoryWell. And my company basically writes the life stories of seniors like my father entering care to better introduce them to their caregivers when they can't introduce themselves. My dad already had aphasia by the time he was entering caregiving and couldn't really tell anybody about himself. And it really helps improve connections. For example, 2 of my dad's caregivers were Ethiopian, and they'd had no idea that my dad had actually lived in Ethiopia for more than 4 years early on in his career with the United Nations. And knowing that connection, they became his champions. They would sit for hours and ask him what it was like to work with Emperor Haile Selassie and what the Empress was like. And for my dad, it really, made a huge difference. And so that's what brought me to MemoryWell. And I just think storytelling is such an important thing for people with Alzheimer's and dementia, because there's an expression in this disease of meeting people where they are. And you can't meet them where they are if you don't know where they are and who they are. And it's often hard for them at a certain point to explain who they are and to introduce themselves. And so being able to find their stories and tell those stories are super important. And it's also one of the things that led me and Lauren and others to start Humans for Dementia, which is a storytelling contest that we do for high school and college students to tell life stories of those living with Alzheimer's and dementia every year, which we are really excited about. And so I want to welcome everybody to the panel. And now that I've introduced myself, I'm going to allow everybody to introduce themselves. So I'm just going to call on you one at a time to talk about who you are, and then we'll get the fun started in this conversation. So starting with Lauren, do you just want to tell us about yourself and what brings you to Alzheimer's and dementia in this crazy, crazy world?
Yeah. Hi, everyone. I'm Lauren Miller Rogen, founder of HFC. My mom was diagnosed with Alzheimer's when she was 55 and I was 25, and I'm sure we'll get into this, but she didn't want me to share that with anyone. She didn't want me to tell anyone about it, and that was really hard for me because I've always been a storyteller. I was always a writer, and so that is what ultimately brought me here. I'm sure we'll get more into it, but yes, that is why
I'm. Kate?
Hi, I'm Kate Burton, and so nice to be with all of you. And my first experience, I have had actually my uncle developed Alzheimer's, which was the first time in our family that had ever happened. And so that was my personal connection to it. And then, but before that, for the last 19 years, I've been playing Dr. Ellis Gray on Grey's Anatomy, who I believe was the first character in network television that was dealing with Alzheimer's. So it's been a great honor to play her.
Awesome. Judy.
Hi, I'm Judy Greer. I'm an actor, and my grandfather had Alzheimer's, my aunt had Alzheimer's, and during the pandemic, I was helping a little with my next door neighbor who had dementia. And yeah, I'm sure we'll talk more about it, but that's my connection. But the first was my maternal grandfather.
Griffin and Clifford.
After you, Cliff. How's it going, guys? This is my twin brother, Griff.
You're sounding like a robot.
We're documentary filmmakers. Can you guys
You're
hear
really
me?
slow for some reason. It's like you're on Audible half speed.
I can take it from here, Cliff.
Griffin sounds like a human.
Sorry about that, guys. The technology world.
Griffin Nash, my twin brother Clifford Nash next to me, sounding like a robot. We're currently producing a documentary on TJ Oshie and his relationship with his father as he battled Alzheimer's. So although we don't personally have a direct connection with our family with Alzheimer's, we've been involved with telling TJ's story for the past 3 years, and it's been incredibly moving. And we've learned a lot. So
Awesome. And Anne, or Dr. Basting.
Anne's fine. So I came to this primarily as a storyteller and an artist about, over 25 years ago, without a personal connection. Found myself on a locked unit of an Alzheimer's wing of a nursing home and trying to do reminiscence. And then my theater training, I just, out of 6 weeks of, blank stares using reminiscence, I just shifted toward improvisation. And it was as though lights went off and 45 minutes of storytelling and laughter and joy. And I tell you, when you feel that, it feels like a miracle. And 25 years, founded timeslips.org, and have really just been trying to bring that tool to as many care partners and people with dementia as possible, because unfortunately it's still sort of the best medicine we have as a way to really get access to joy and connection and meaning making all the way to the end. So now I'll say now I find myself 25 years later, my mom is experiencing it, so I'm also caregiving as well.
Wow. Well, I'm going to start with Lauren, just to start off to kick off the questioning. We're so happy to have you here with us today. And obviously, you've used your platform to tell your family's story and your mom's experience with Alzheimer's. But I'm wondering, I know for me, at first, when I was talking about this, it was really personal. Ended up talking about my father's diaper and his incontinence and things that are really just, I would know he would be mortified if I had spoken about. And I guess my question is, were you ever concerned about talking about your mom and your family's experience in such a public way? And has your approach to storytelling, not only your own story, but others, has it evolved?
Yeah. I mean, I touched on it briefly, but, when my mom was first diagnosed, she felt so much stigma. Both of her parents had dementia. And so, she had this vision of what her future was going to be. And as a woman who was very in control and used her mind, she was a teacher. Obviously, that was terrifying. And so she didn't want us to tell anyone, family members, et cetera. And that was really hard for me. And then eventually, the truth is, her disease progressed, and my need to share and write and tell what was going on in my life grew as well. And so I figured ultimately, as a teacher, she would want to share what was going on. And so I decided to start talking about it, and realized that we had this platform, and felt like, as a person who was younger than a lot of the people that I'd seen talking about it, felt like, I don't need to be so polite about it. And because this wasn't a polite disease to me and what it was doing to my family. And so I feel like, with the creation of HFC, we sort of honed our voices like, this is a shitty disease and it's terribly fucked up, and we're going to do whatever we can, and we're going to say whatever we can to talk about it and share it, because so much of the problem is that people don't know about it. People, hide in the shadows when they have this disease. And we didn't want to do that, because if you do that, nothing will change. And so, so now we're, obviously we have HFC, but we're developing an animated movie that we got financing for a few months ago. It's a black and white Alzheimer's comedy, animated. It's going to be really successful at the box office. But it is also very meaningful. It's based on a graphic novel and a true story. And, I think that, again, sharing these stories is the way to affect change. It's the way to teach people, this is what my experience is. Let me hear your experience. How can we fix it together?
I'd love to just follow up on that, and the idea of comedy in Alzheimer's, and Lauren, weigh in, but also others feel free to weigh in on this. I know for me, there were parts of my experience with my dad where it got so weird and so crazy and so awful in so many ways that you could only laugh, when he thought I was my mom for 3 months and tried to make out with me every day, and so tell me a little bit about the importance of levity in caregiving.
Yeah, I mean, yeah, I'll talk about the film that we're developing. It's based on this graphic novel called Tangles, written by a woman named Sarah Levitt, who cared for her mom when she was in her early 20s. A very similar story to my mom. She was a teacher, diagnosed at 55. And, and the graphic novel really has such a balance of those moments. And it rang so true to me because, I've always said, like, sometimes something is so sad, you just have to laugh. And like, and like you said, I mean, that example you gave about your dad, it is sad and scary, but like, what else are you going to do? And so you find the humor to get through those dark moments, which certainly come frequently, but you grab onto whatever you can and laugh about it.
On the other side of the stage, Kate, a lot of the audience would know you from playing the vice president on Scandal. I love that series. You're a multiple Emmy and Tony Award winning actress. We've seen you, as you said, Dr. Ellis Gray on this, what I think must be one of the longest running shows in forever. It's been on that show. And so she has Alzheimer's, Dr. Ellis Gray. For those of you, for like the 5 people in America who haven't seen that show and not know that about you, can you talk a little bit about preparing to play, that role and playing somebody with Alzheimer's? Is she there? We might have lost her.
Jay,
I don't.
Yeah, I think we're having tech difficulties, so we are working with her in the background to try and get her back online.
Can you hear me?
Oh, there
you are.
There you are.
Sorry, it was just went away.
I just did a little question to you, Kate, if you, and I'll repeat it just very briefly, wanted to talk to you about taking this from the acting side of things and preparing to play somebody with Alzheimer's, and can you talk to us about playing Dr. Ellis Gray?
Oh, we might have just lost her again.
The miracles of modern technology. We'll come back to it.
I can answer for her.
Okay.
I'm just kidding.
Well, so moving on to Judy, who's also an actress, so you can talk a little bit about this from a different perspective. I read somewhere that your husband calls you America's best friend, which is so true. You've had more than 200 roles in your career, which is amazing longevity, talking about long-running things and shows. Yeah. And you also have a great talent for storytelling. And I guess for me, my question is, tell us how you got into acting and how Alzheimer's has affected your family, and has it impacted your work at all and your drive for advocacy?
Well, I mean, I kind of got into acting as a dare from a girl I went to high school with who was auditioning for an acting program and told me that I would never get in. And so that was a fun challenge. I got in. And I'm also a working actor and she's not, which is so awful to say. But anyway, I'm sure she has a really rewarding life. We did not stay in touch. So the second part of the question is, how has Alzheimer's affected my life? I think was that.
Your acting and your advocacy. Yeah.
Well, the advocacy, when you have a bit of a platform, you can choose to, use it for selfies or maybe other stuff. So it's been interesting to kind of sift through different causes and things that, we all get approached with, like whether it's just for your money or for your voice. And this Alzheimer's is so close to home because I have family members that have suffered from it. And the first one that I remember being my grandfather. And when I was a young girl, he was living with my grandmother in their house together. And I remember one day I was visiting them and I was helping him make his bed. He was sleeping in a different room downstairs because climbing the stairs was getting hard for him. And I was helping him make his bed and he didn't like what I was doing and he got really angry and he hit me. And I had never been hit before like that. And it was really upsetting and I didn't really understand. And I was crying and I told my grandmother and then my grandmother started crying. And then of course she told my parents, and then the family kind of gathered and found out that, he'd been hitting my grandmother, but she didn't want to tell anyone because she didn't want him to be put into a home, which is what, of course, we ultimately ended up having to do for her own safety, because he just didn't know. And he was in a really angry time in his disease. And it was really hard on the whole family, and it was really heartbreaking, and it was hard to see my grandmother so upset, and I felt like I had done something wrong, and the secret was now out, and she had bruises on her, and it was just too much for her to caregive, but she didn't want to let him down, and she didn't want to let him go. And I know I'm telling a story that so many people can relate to, but it was something that I learned. I was probably 6 or 7, that this is the nastiest disease, because you still have this person in front of you, but they're not there. They're not there the way that you think of them as being there, or the way you remember. Anyway, that's something that has stuck with me, obviously, since then. And so then when it comes time to talk about things I give a shit about, this is at the top of the list. And then seeing my aunt, who I loved so much, his daughter suffer from it, and her suffering from it was in an even a different way, because this disease is so fucked up that it does something different to everybody. And so, yeah, that's kind of my story about my bigger, longer story about Alzheimer's, and why I want to help spread awareness and open conversations for caregivers, for people suffering from it, for people who just don't know what this disease is all about. If you don't have someone like this in your life, like how awful it is.
Absolutely. It is the worst club in the world, as I've often called it. So,
yeah.
Now, Kate, that we have you back, I'm going to grab the moment before you, in case you go away again. Just want to talk to you.
I don't know what happened. Yes.
Would love to just hear about your experience playing Dr. Alice Gray on TV, and how does an actor prep for a role to play somebody with Alzheimer's, and did it impact you at all?
Yes. It's the strangest thing, because I'm 65 now, and I got cast as Alice Gray when I was 46. And I thought, oh, that's crazy. I'm far too young to play a woman with Alzheimer's. I knew nothing about it. And I hope you can hear me. I'm going in a little funny connectivity place here. You hear me, good. So basically, yeah, so I started to play her. I was cast in the pilot. I remember my agent saying, okay, there's a show you're going up for. It's called Surgeons. It's the pilot. It's, and I said, oh, is it like ER or something? And they said, yeah, well, kind of, it's a little bit different. And it's written by this young woman who just came out of USC, African-American woman, Shonda Rhimes. She's, totally a newbie, her first thing. Oh, she'd done a little movie. And so I met this wonderful young woman, and I met everybody else who was also very young. We're all much older now. And it was like one of those moments where I read for it, and I knew the second I finished reading. Judy, you know this moment where you go, oh my God, oh no, I got the job. And because it had been characterized, they said, my agent said, she's the mother of the leading lady. She has early onset Alzheimer's. And I thought, I'm 46 years old. Oh dear God, my whole life is passing before my eyes. I thought, oh, that's it. Anyway, little did I know that, number one, she would become, she was always Alice Gray, but Alice Gray became you always have these moments in your life as an actor where you have a character or two that you play that is just like, that's what you're known for. And she's the one. And so what blew my mind, and I thought, how are we going to tell this story? Am I always going to be in a nursing home? And for the first 3 or 4 episodes, I was in a nursing home. And I said to my agent, I was like, I just don't know if I can do this. This is like intense. I don't know to play this kind of, I'm not even recognizing my daughter. The second episode, I slapped my daughter really hard. And I was like, oh my God, that's so violent. I had no idea. I was learning so much as an actor, playing her. And then right when I was about to say, you know what, guys, I just don't know that I can do this. Then Shonda started writing. Her writing moved me into the hospital. where suddenly I was meeting all the other characters. And from that moment on, for 3 years that I was on it consistently, and then I've been on it ever since, off and on, it just was the most interesting character I've ever played in my whole life. And the most thrilling thing was the day after it went on the air the very first time, which was after Desperate Housewives. Remember that amazing show? And I was sitting on the subway in New York, and it had been on one single time the night before the pilot. And I was doing the New York Times crossword puzzle. And this woman in front of me said, "Are you doing the crossword puzzle to keep your Alzheimer's at bay, Dr. Gray?" And it was like, it had been on one single time. And I remember thinking at that moment, oh my God. And from that point on, Judy, like you were saying, people on the subway, people in the street, people coming up to me going, "My mother has Alzheimer's, my grandmother has Alzheimer's, thank you. And I'm like, are you kidding? Thank you. Thank you for, I mean, it's shocking to me to have been doing this for so long. It's been a huge part of my life. So there you go.
Amazing. Well, Cliff and Griff,
And I can't
I
hear
love
you
the
now.
fact that I can say Cliff and
Sorry,
Griff.
there's something terribly wrong. Okay, just keep talking. I'm sure I'll catch up at some point.
Great. Cliff and Griff, you're Emmy Award-winning filmmakers from Boston, and would it be fair to say that you stumbled onto this role of telling a family story and their journaling with Alzheimer's, and just tell us a little bit about your work?
Sure. I don't sound like a robot anymore, do I?
No, you're liberated.
I'm going to blame my AirPods on that. Yeah, I mean, just to summarize our project, we got in contact with TJ Oshie after we wrapped up a previous sports doc on Julian Edelman, and we originally thought that he had just came off of rehabbing a broken collarbone. And if you guys don't know who TJ Oshie is, he's an NHL hockey player for the Washington Capitals. If you watch Olympic hockey, he was the guy in 2014 that shot over and over and over again in an Olympic shootout against Russia, and they ended up winning the game. And he was 4 for 6. He shot a lot. So long story short, famed hockey player. We thought it was going to be a short 20, 30-minute recovery piece, back at it. And then he started talking to us about his dad. And everybody knows, if they're hockey fans, that after he won the Stanley Cup with the Capitals in 2018, he publicly announced, when he was getting interviewed by Lindsay Zarniak, that his father has Alzheimer's. And he didn't realize at that moment how big of an impact that was, just publicly announcing that. And when we started talking to him about it, every memory he talked about his dad. And at the time, his dad was still alive. It was just these great stories. And we're like, there's something here. And Griff and I were like, every time we'd fly down to DC and we'd film with TJ, and he'd be talking about his dad. And I was like, there's something here. There's a story here. And sure enough, we're going on 3 years now. We just wrapped up the 95% of the rough cut. We have a story that the outer shell is about TJ's journey to the NHL, but the inner story of this documentary is about his relationship with his father and about all of the stuff he went through, his family went through, as his dad's health deteriorated while his NHL career was skyrocketing. And it was a tough story to tell, because at first TJ wanted to only talk about the positive parts of it. And as soon as he realized how important it was that he was going to be able to raise awareness from his telling his story, he then dove deeper and exposed more and became more vulnerable with us. And it was a really moving project. And I got to tell you, we work with a lot of professional athletes, and just this story, I mean, it hits home in so many ways. Like, we've learned so much about this disease, and it's a lot more common than anybody thinks about. Like, I mean, within 1 or 2 degrees of separation, somebody knows somebody that is suffering from this, or knows somebody else that has a direct family member. So we've done a lot of we've done a lot of work on this project, and it's been really moving, I got to say. I'll bring it over to my brother.
Yeah, I mean, just adding on what Cliff said, it's been 3 years running. I mean, TJ's the salt of the earth. like, he's an open book. He's participated with HFC in the past. I think just reflecting on the last 3 years, like, we've just been trying to make a project, like, tell his story truthfully, and deliver a final product that his family is going to be proud of, and also at the same time raising hope. And just, we've had the luxury of sitting down and interviewing Dr. Isaacson from HFC for probably 2 hours, and the amount of information that we learned about Alzheimer's just from sitting down with him was fascinating. I mean, when we first started this project, I had no idea that people could get Alzheimer's in earlier years. And this was before we even talked to TJ about his dad. And it, like, knowing that there are things that you can do leading up to this, or preventative things, there are options out there. Like, that's another thing. We had no idea. And it was like, we kept asking ourselves, even in the edits, like, why isn't this more common knowledge? And it's like, speaking with Lauren too, like, we've just, like, not a lot of people want to talk about this subject. And, we're still working to get the thing out there. And I just, it's been a moving experience, to say the least. So
amazing. Anne, if you don't, anyone in the audience doesn't know Anne, Dr. Anne Basting, you should. She's an incredible writer, author, artist, advocate. She is a MacArthur Fellow and a professor of English at the University of Wisconsin, and the founder of, and if you don't know it, go to it, timeslips.org. It's a nonprofit that actually does a lot of storytelling with seniors and supports caregivers who infuse creativity into care, which is really cool. And I would just love for you to talk a little bit about the work that you've done on behalf of dementia caregivers.
Sure. I mean, I described, first of all, it's just a thrill to hear all these stories from you all. It's hard to be the last one. I talked about that moment, of transformation, of this realization that so much is about, going to the point of pain of people's memories and what's lost. That moment when all of a sudden we were singing and laughing and 45 minutes of a story, and people were seeing each other and connecting to each other, and the staff had actually joined around us and were singing and laughing with us, which made it clear that the staff and the caregivers wanted these tools as much as the people with dementia and Alzheimer's wanted them. And it was just out of thin air. The artists on the panel know that you can make things up out of nothing. Your tool is just being present with someone and using imagination. And I'm like, oh, okay, let's test this. Let's get it out there. And then you run headlong into this thing of the care systems are so broken. There's so much stigma. There's blockages, and we've all kind of talked about it. There's blockages at every point for getting the word out. You can use ageism and ableism and all those different things, and just how expensive it is, and how much responsibility the primary home caregiver can have in these situations, and how little support and understanding there is culturally at large, that all of a sudden the scholar in me was like, oh, I have to study what are the stories we're telling about this. What, at the time I was doing that was in the mid 2000s, and there weren't, thank God for the animated movie you're going to make, Lauren, because that's going to be a game changer in the way we talk about this. So the scholar side was then looking at systems and how we can do systems change. So Time Slips is really that core approach, and giving those very simple tools to family caregivers, but then also trying to kind of pour it into the water of care systems to try to get it out there as broadly as possible, so that even telephone volunteers can use creative engagement when they reach out to someone, or you can use it through Zoom volunteers, or anywhere, frontline nursing assistants want to connect, and they really want to, but they don't often know how. So it's really this effort to get it out there as broadly as possible in every systematic way that we can. And then, of course, the artist and writer in me trying to get these stories out there in a really accessible way as much as possible. That's boiled down to a couple of books I've done in the past of Forget Memory, which is an analysis of I wrote actually about Denny Crane. I did not write about Grey's Anatomy yet, but from Boston Legal, but other stories, and also just how those stories are, the story of dementia and Alzheimer's is complicated. And stories in mainstream media like to be kind of simple. And so it tends to be this tragedy. And the higher the role of the character, the larger the fall. So that has really tended to be the story that we tell. And how can we make different stories? We did a project with Time Slips, reimagining the story of Peter Pan with 12 rural nursing homes across the state of Kentucky. And those over a year, we totally designed an immersive participatory theater piece that was staged in the nursing home with the residents, with the staff, inviting in local young people to be part of it, and an outside audience that just completely had their minds blown about what's possible by people living with Alzheimer's, because nursing homes are about 80% Alzheimer's at this point. So it just shows you that there's so much you can do to transform the way we understand this and the stories that we tell.
Amazing. I think it's, I know that whenever I speak publicly about my caregiving experience, the audience members afterwards always come up to me afterwards, and they're like looking around as if they don't want anyone else to hear, and then they want to share their stories. And it's always such a clandestine thing. And I wish that there were ways to make people feel more comfortable. And I know it's embarrassing sometimes for the one who has, the disease, and it's embarrassing sometimes for us to talk about it. But I just want to applaud everybody in the panel for doing so much to promote and talk openly and freely about the difficulties of this disease and to talk about storytelling. And with that thought, I'm going to open this up to questions because we have about 8 minutes left, and I would love to just get some questions in from the audience. I'm not entirely sure how this works, so if hopefully I can figure this out. All right, I see a hand raised. I just have to figure out how to do that.
There's a chat.
Oh yeah, maybe if you want to put the questions in the chat, that might be.
But I don't know how one writes into the chat. I just see the chat.
Yes.
Oh, someone loves tangles. Great. I'm glad
people should be able to write their questions. I'm not sure if they have the ability to unmute themselves.
Okay. Well, if you would like to write your questions in the chat, please, everybody, that would be really helpful.
While that's happening, if I can just add that, I think, all of us with a platform are using storytelling to end stigma, but I think that something that caregivers often, whether they don't have time or they don't have the emotional strength to do, is to tell their own story, just to their friends, to their family, to anyone. And I think that, caregivers can be so isolated and are just trying to make ends meet. And so therefore they fall silent and they aren't sharing the struggle, and that is so important. So of course, when you have a platform, if you can tell your story, but as individuals, we need to be open with each other, with our friends and our family, about what we're going through, because that's equally as important, in my opinion, as as watching Ellis Gray go through what she does on television, watching Judy, as you talked about, your neighbor, and caring, helping, these are all the stories that we should be sharing, all of those things.
There is a question here in the chat that says, where can I go for help in dealing with my mother who has vascular dementia? She has become nasty on some days and I tend to withdraw, which is what we're talking about. This is from Rebecca.
Where do you even see that? I don't even see it.
Look, I don't even understand. I saw.
If you go to current room, and there's another question as well, but I'll let the panel sort of feel free if anyone has thoughts on resources for vascular dementia. I know there's tons of resources on various different Alzheimer's associations, websites.
Yes.
They're ready for charity. HFC has a ton of resources on their websites. I frankly would just say, for me, going to group counseling, like at a local sort of assisted living place, when that was hugely impactful for me. And just having others who've gone through this disease or going through this disease give you tips. Like my dad went through this really paranoid phase where he was constantly telling us, "You're stealing my wallet. You're stealing my wallet." And one of the women at the panel was like, or in this group therapy, was like, "Yeah, that happened to my husband. I just created like 12 wallets with like Blockbuster cards in them. And every time he was like, 'You're stealing my wallet,' she'd be like, 'Bing, here's a new wallet.'" And it totally worked. It was an amazing hack. So those local groups are really incredible.
Creative.
Yeah. And, and HFC has virtual groups, we meet online. You don't even have to leave your home. And so, yeah, I think it's looking, caregivers need support. And I would echo that, in that once I was in a group, my load felt lighter. So much lighter.
I also think that there's something that happens when people with dementia and Alzheimer's are in social situations. If you're out of the one-on-one, sometimes the behavior changes and people like go back into old social cues and respond very differently than when it's just you. And there are hopefully a growing number. This is one of my current obsessions, is getting memory cafes in every faith-based organization, every library, every arts and culture center should have a memory cafe, which is just a gathering of caregivers and the people that support their care partners for just like 90 minutes of a conversation and a little programming, often creative engagement. And it can be a game changer to get out and be among people. And that's part of reducing the stigma and telling your story, like Lauren said, is just imagine if everyone out there, restaurants, banks, what if everybody understood what this was? The experience is so different. So that storytelling is huge.
I wonder too if you're not finding any resources, if you are on a Nextdoor app or something, if you're so bold as to ask any of your neighbors or anyone local if they're willing to meet for coffee and talk about this with aging parents or anything, could also be an option. I'm making that up, but it seems like something that would be a good idea to do.
If someone has a neighbor like you, perhaps.
I got rid of Nextdoor because it felt like it was, but yes, maybe that would work.
I just want to, we have a few minutes left, and there's one question here that I feel really speaks to the panel, and I'd love to have everyone to weigh in on it. And that is, Heather S. says, "I feel a lot of pressure to record as many stories as I know about my father because I'm his memory now. Does anyone else feel this way?" And there was a response into this in the chat from Richard saying, "Writing your story one sentence at a time as caregiving allows." But I'd love for everybody just to weigh in. Do you have any recommendations and advice on how to storytell?
Oof. It's interesting. I was a big journaler my whole life, and then didn't journal throughout the entire time because I think that my mom was sick, because I think that writing it down was really difficult. And so I think that, you have a desire to want to, collect all the stories and write it down and make sure you remember it. But that can often be hard. And so I think that you have to find what works for you, and whether that's conversation, whether that's writing something down in a journal, or, or really, going through a formal storytelling process, right, Jay? Like, a formal, tell someone's story process. I think you have to see what fits for you and not feel the pressure to share in a way that doesn't feel true to who you are. Because I think that if there's one thing caregivers don't need, it's more pressure. That's for sure.
Absolutely.
I know there's like a lot of these books or downloadable books that you can have your family answer questions. And maybe if you're overwhelmed because you're caregiving, you could get some of your family members to write in their favorite memories or things that they know about the person. Could also help. So much pressure doesn't necessarily have to be on you. It's been fun to read those from my aunt.
StoryCorps also has an interview tool that's pretty helpful. And I'd also say, that thing like shake off the frustration whenever if you're trying to write something, just let it be whatever form. Because I think story can be, a poem. It can be 3 words on a blank note card. Or, one of the things I did with my mom was I got really happy with Post-it notes. I'm a big Post-it note gal. And we would just go around to objects in the house and, what do you see here? Do you tell me what you see here? Or what's something beautiful you observe here? And then just those Post-it notes were all over, as a way to kind of engage in the moment. And they're micro stories, just emotions that you're guiding into a shape, and sharing. And even that is a good start.
That is such a lovely sentiment, and I hope that everybody does that. And with that, we are now out of time, so we're going to conclude this panel. And thank you so much, panelists. That was incredible hearing all of your stories and the work that you're doing storytelling in this important space.